Exciting news, everyone. My new book, I Wish I'd Quit Sooner, is officially out now. You can grab it on all major book retailers and online distributors, and the audiobook is also available on all the popular listening apps. Visit drlaura.live or check the link in the show notes to get your copy today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Where Work Meets Life. I'm Dr. Laura, and I am so excited today to be doing an episode about navigating a toxic workplace, the myths and realities of turning around an unhealthy culture, with Catherine Mattice, who is an amazing, brilliant workplace culture expert, culture strategist, a best-selling author, and an international keynote speaker. And I came across her brilliant work through her latest book, Navigating a Toxic Workplace for Dummies, which I'm holding up. It's a Wiley publication in the Dummies series. And I was just so intrigued to see that someone had tackled this subject in such a practical, applicable way. And we're definitely kindred spirits. We're both about making cultures better and eradicating toxic leadership. And we just have a lot in common. So I thought, why not have a conversation about how we can address incivility and workplace toxicity to build healthier cultures. A little more about Catherine. She runs an organization called Civility Partners, and they're an organizational development firm that really focuses on creating respectful workplace cultures across companies, from Fortune 500s to small businesses and everything in between. And she specializes in turning around toxic cultures, and she's not afraid to go in and address those issues. She's also a TEDx speaker. She's been all over the media, USA Today, Bloomberg, CNN, etc. She's also published over 60 courses on LinkedIn Learning. So I'm just in awe. I'm a huge fan of Catherine. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think you're doing amazing work, and I want to know more. I know you've written multiple books, but tell us about your latest book and what was your vision and mission behind doing it?
Yeah. So Wiley actually reached out to me, which was a huge honor that they reached out. So, Dummies has a very specific format that they use. And when I was speaking to Tracy, my contact over there, who Tracy had decided Wiley needed a book with this title, and then went looking for somebody to write it. And so when I asked her, am I up against other authors? Do I need to prove to you that I'm the one? She said, no, I want you to write it. So that was very cool. And I think, just circling around to your question, I promise I'm getting there. I think, I write very practical anyway. We do a weekly blog that I'm going to assume, I don't know, that Tracy probably saw it and thought she's the best candidate because she writes just like Dummies is looking for. We try to keep everything very simple, very actionable. And it was actually a really big joy to write. It's like everything I've learned in the last 16 years, and then everything I had in grad school, all in there. There's lots of stories and examples and action items and checklists and all sorts of things. So my vision and the Dummies vision aligned. I align with the Dummies.
But why this topic, right? Why this topic? Why back in grad school did you choose to focus in this arena?
So I was the director of HR for an organization where there was somebody who engaged in bullying. And I saw firsthand the damage that he was causing the organization in terms of costs, real costs, turnover. I was wasting time hiring new people in, and then they would quit and I'd have to hire more people in. And I also felt bullied. So I was experiencing firsthand the damage that it causes individuals when they're working with a bully. And then I started graduate school at San Diego State, and just the universe was pointing me in the right direction. One class in my first semester was ethnography, which, as you know, is a form of research where you're in the situation. So for ethnography, I'm like, if I'm going to write a paper, it needs to be about work. My other class was called The Dark Side of Communication, and it was about stalking and domestic violence and like the dark ways that humans communicate. And so, of course, I needed a topic for that. paper for that class. And so I thought, I'm going to write about toxic behavior essentially. And came across the phrase workplace bullying and ended up doing all of my graduate research, no matter the class moving forward. That was the topic I wrote about. And so I joke I have a master's degree in bullying. um, I got out of graduate school and decided there aren't other consultants doing work on this toxic environment. And so I'm going to do that. So here I am.
So you saw an opportunity and you had the lived experience of being bullied yourself by the same individual you were talking about, that bully that you were trying to probably extricate from the organization, and then he ended up bullying you?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. He was, what was fascinating when I started writing these papers way back when, that first semester, was that um, as gray area as human behavior is and as unpredictable as human behavior is, I was very fascinated by how um, behavior or bullying sort of unfolds in the same way almost every time. So it was very therapeutic for me to learn that, according to the research, that my boss's response was the same as everybody else's, which was to not do anything. I spent a lot of time talking to the president. Can you address this? Why do you let him act that way? And he would just say, well, that's just how he is. Let him be, or be the bigger person. And so, yeah, I felt like I couldn't solve it. And actually, I got fired from that job. It bothered me so much, this person's behavior. I stopped producing, really and truly. I started showing up late, and I was just kind of started feeling like, well, if you don't care about me and my health or the health of the other people who work here, and that's your solution is to just ignore it, then I don't have any loyalty to you either. And it started showing up in my work.
Oh dear. So you see that pattern in your research as well, of course. And it sounds like that CEO was an ostrich, I called him, digging his head in the sand.
Yes. And that's like people say, or like to villainize someone who bullies, but we forget about the CEO or the leader who's allowing it or even encouraging it by offering bonuses and promotions and things. So that's part of the process is people are allowing that behavior to occur.
Yeah. And let me guess, the bully brought in revenue, brought in projects. What did they do well? Like, why would they be staying?
In that situation, my boss thought that he was so valuable because he'd been there a long time. So he had a lot of organizational knowledge. And I mean, then and now I'm like, he wasn't, I mean, we were a 30 people company. We could have replaced him, but the boss was conflict avoidant. But yeah, that's usually why it's allowed. That person brings in revenue or clients, or they have industry contacts that the company's relying on, or they have institutional knowledge. So there's some reason the leader's deciding to allow it.
Yeah, and in this case, fear and conflict avoidance. So, what trends, Catherine, are you noticing these days? Like, let's talk about post pandemic, the last few years. What trends are you noticing when it comes to workplace cultures?
Well, I'll go back to the beginning. When I started Civility Partners 16 years ago, nobody was talking about bullying or employee experience or employee engagement. And so it was kind of like either it was harassment or nothing. There was no conversation about microaggressions and inclusivity and the importance of feeling good at work and well-being. So I have seen a real big shift in those conversations, which has been great. But I think we still have such a long way to go. I mean, you and I wouldn't be writing books about this if things were good, right? So, and unfortunately, a lot of our clients come to us after some big, ugly thing happened, and their culture has been cracking for a while and finally gave way. So, that's the main trend I see, that we're evolving. We still have a long way to go. I also, there's no research on this just yet. In the pandemic, when everybody went remote, the little bit of research that there is around sort of toxic behaviors and working from home is that it actually didn't change. The kind of amount of toxic behavior was the same. I'm not sure. I just, educated guess. I think it probably was more because everybody was so stressed out and, isolated, and all of these risk factors that create toxic behaviors were in existence. And so I don't know that I'm saying, I don't know if the research was super accurate, but who am I to judge the research?
And during the pandemic, I saw also a lot of instances of leaders becoming more human because they were seeing the human side of their employees' lives. So I saw it as a chance of maybe softening a bit or being more human centered. And then I've seen that slide anecdotally in my experience. I think with an economy that's a bit soft and unstable, I think it brings out worse behaviors and more territorial behaviors, more, me versus you. Do you see that as well, Catherine?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And that's a lot of times, risk factors are things like organizational change or a new leader or something that creates ambiguity. And I do know that ambiguity is the number one risk factor for workplace bullying, specifically that behavior, because it makes it easy to bully if things are ambiguous and there aren't clear expectations and things. But yeah, I do see that. But that's a fair point. I agree. I think during the pandemic, we saw inside the CEO's home. We'd never seen it before, and everybody was a little more vulnerable.
They were. So yeah, I just see more fear out there these days. And again, good for you to be doing this work on addressing toxic cultures. And what I liked in your book, well, one of the many things I liked in your beautiful book here, I'll hold it up again for those on YouTube, is the toxic behavior spectrum, where you shared the degrees of toxicity that you see and how cultures tend to move through these levels of toxicity. Can you explain that for our listeners?
Sure. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier about this whole thing of harassment or nothing. And although the conversation has evolved to, we also want well-being and engagement and all these things, I still see a lot of that unlawful or not. And so the spectrum is something I've been talking about probably since grad school, where for harassment, for example, harassment prevention training programs usually talk about what harassment is, the legal definition. I keep hearing about this training where it's like red, yellow, or green, kind of meaning that that's unlawful, so it's red. Then there's all these other things that are yellow, and then there's, obviously good behavior. I don't love that. I think there's only two choices. It's respectful or it's not. It's harmful or it's hurtful, or harmful or helpful. And so that's what that spectrum is about. That let's look at incivility and microaggressions and gossip and things that evolve into bullying and harassment and discrimination if they're not addressed. And so I use that spectrum a lot in terms of talking about what managers need to learn, for example, that we teach managers how to have a performance conversation, maybe how to delegate, and there's sort of these technical skills for managing. But what about coaching someone who engages in gossip? What about how to proactively live the core values every day within your team? What about, teaching your team to build psychological safety within each other? So the point ultimately is, let's talk about the stuff that's not so bad, quote unquote, because it's easier to solve, and that's real prevention from toxic behaviors.
And it's the little things that, like you say, it's a slippery slope. It gets worse over time. And oftentimes with toxic leaders, I see a honeymoon period where at first they're really great. They're really supportive. They're excited to have you. And then it gradually erodes. Is that what you see too over time, that erosion?
Yes, I hear too in my, we coach leaders accused of bullying. We hear that, they'll stop for a few months when the CEO gets in there and tells them to stop. But then it just kind of starts to come back around. So they're in this cycle of stop it, and then they're good for a little bit, and then they're not.
Exactly. Got to keep a close eye on that. And unfortunately, it's sometimes easy to just ignore it when you're busy or you're an ostrich and putting your head in the sand. But these microaggressions can be really lethal, right? It's almost death by 1,000 paper cuts, these little aggressions over time as well.
Yeah, well, what happens is it starts to become normal. So you have, even, I like to pick on gossip because we're humans. Everybody does it to a certain extent. So let's say there's gossip in an organization. It becomes normalized and people build tolerance for it. And so it becomes more and more okay. And then the I don't know, inappropriate sarcasm starts to kick in and then that becomes normal. So yeah, over time, these things that are not unlawful behaviors, but they are harmful, because people start to feel like, well, that's just how it is here. I have to deal with that. Nobody else is speaking up against the gossip or whatever. I guess I won't either. And so it's insidious, and it turns into a culture problem. And now it's no longer, hey, stop gossiping. It's the organization has facilitated that bad behavior, and the organization needs to address its own systems and behavior as part of a culture change.
Yes, I could see that. Absolutely. Well explained, Catherine. So, what are some common misconceptions about harassment versus bullying?
That they're not the same thing. I hear a lot that bullying is the lower level version of harassment. And I hate it when I hear HR say it doesn't rise to the level of harassment. I hate that. It's like nails on a chalkboard. Bullying and harassment are the exact same thing. I'm talking about America, where I am. If you look at the federal law, harassment is defined as behavior that is so severe or pervasive, a reasonable person would consider it intimidating, hostile, or abusive, or it feels like a condition of employment. Harassment has this other added thing that it's focused on a protected characteristic. That aside, if you just think about the two things I just said, severe and pervasive and feels like a condition of employment, that describes bullying. So they're the same. The only difference is who you aim it at. So I often joke, hey, if you want to be a bully or you want to harass people, just harass everybody. Equal opportunity harassment, and you're good to go.
Well said. So, it really, all of it is toxic, basically, whether we label it discrimination or, sorry, harassment or bullying. And then, how does discrimination fit around those two in your view?
Yeah, so discrimination is an overarching word for harassment. So discrimination is anything that separates people out, and harassment is a form of discrimination, because you're doing it based on that protected characteristic. So going back to that spectrum, I like to say that there's the kind of unprofessional behaviors, which is unresolved conflict, sarcasm, gossip, microaggressions, being rude, those things. And then if that stuff's allowed to stay on, then it evolves into abusive conduct. And I would say then in its bubble are abusive conduct, bullying, harassment, discrimination, mobbing, hazing. So that's the next level on that spectrum. And then up from there is workplace violence. And that's another misconception, that violence only includes physical harm. But I have coached many individuals who have created a whole lot of fear for our physical bodies based on their behavior. For example, really aggressive body language or aggressive facial expressions. Or I coached a woman, people said she would smack her hand. Why are we doing this? And that's violence, even if she's not touching anybody.
Yeah, a slippery slope comes to mind, and none of it is acceptable, but it can become normalized. And that's the scary thing when behavior like that is normal. And I see a lot of parallels in my work around toxic leadership with abusive romantic relationships, the way that it unfolds, where it happens gradually, and then you're financially dependent. So you feel trapped and you can't get out. And it tends to get worse, not better over time if unaddressed. Would you agree with that?
100%. Bullying and harassment are abuse at work. And I agree. You can take a model of domestic violence, and it's the same model at the workplace.
So, in your book, you describe 10 myths of a toxic workplace. I want you to tell us the top 3 that you see most in your practice, and how are you helping to address these?
Let's see. Well, here, one of my kind of favorites, or the biggest myth, is that HR will make it worse. So here's the thing. If you read the academic research on bullying and HR, the academics have decided that HR will make it worse. That's everybody's story. I told HR, retaliated or told the person I complained it got worse. So I can't discount that research. However, in my experience interacting with HR leaders all these years, the story that I'm hearing from them is that my kind of like my own story. I've been talking to the boss about it. I can't get them to give me resources to either coach this individual or do some whole culture stuff. We need to do a survey. I've been bringing it up for years. And so I do think there's a misconception that HR is on the employer's side. They don't care. I mean, HR isn't full of a bunch of psychopaths. HR is full of people who joined HR because they do care about people. So I think it's a misconception to just assume that HR is going to make it worse. And my book has a whole chapter on sort of assessing your HR department's ability to help you if you do make a complaint. They have to be granted permission and resources and time to help you. And so I think HR is caught in this kind of being villainized thing where it's not fair to them. Another myth that's one of my sort of favorites to talk about is that culture comes from the top. Culture is developed by every single person in the organization, and it's developed within our teams. So, I mean, unless you're in a 5-person company where you're interacting with the top every single day, I don't think your idea of culture in your own organization is coming from the top. It comes from your middle manager, whoever your direct leader is. The only way that culture really comes from the top is that leaders get to decide if they want to put resources toward a certain kind of culture. But beyond that, I really disagree with this idea that it comes from the top, especially in large organizations. The last one I'll share is around quitting. A lot of people, I think, feel like I'm being bullied. I'm going to stay and fight. Why should I have to be the one to leave? But I want everybody who's maybe considering leaving to understand that quitting is a power move. It does not mean you've lost the battle. It means you've chosen yourself over the employer and that you're taking control back. And so if you need to leave, then leave. Nobody faults you for it. I know that's easier said than done, but I just want to, it's not defeat if you quit.
Exactly. That's why my book that's coming out January 13th, so it'll come out before this episode launches, but I wish I'd quit sooner, Practical Strategies for Navigating and Escaping a Toxic Boss, because that's what I heard from a lot of research participants. They wish they had quit sooner, knowing what they know now. And I think we're aligned in a lot of things. And one thing we're really aligned in is HR. They're often stuck in the politics and they're caught. And I know a lot of HRs who have gone to bat, HR leaders who have gone to bat for people. And I love HR. But I do see that sometimes they're trapped in the politics. And if they're reporting to a toxic executive, it's really, really hard to enact change.
Yeah. And like I said, in all my sales calls in all these years, that's who I'm selling to. So I get to talk to a variety of HR people all over the world. And rarely is it like, oh, so this happened and I told my boss and they were like, here's a bunch of money to fix it. I've been trying to solve this for 10 years and I finally got some resources because some horrible thing happened. So yeah, let's not villainize HR people. They're trying to help.
No, we shouldn't. But every now and then a toxic leader can get into the HR VP role or in one of those roles. Every now and then I've seen it and I find that really sad because that's supposed to be the area that helps is the kind of nurturing area of an organization. But luckily that I don't see that often. Do you, Catherine?
I do sometimes see it. I mean, I do a lot of webinars for HR as part of, bringing in leads. And I do see that sometimes in the chat, like, well, my boss is the CHRO or somebody and they're the boss or they're the bully. What do I do? And I'm like, quit or talk to the CEO if you can. But yes, there is where there's people, there's drama, no matter the department or industry.
You're right. It cuts across every industry, doesn't it, really? No industry is immune and no profession is immune.
That's right. I think some industries have more risk factors than others. For example, government and healthcare and university or higher ed are 3 big places that share a lot of similar risk factors that the research has found to facilitate toxic behavior. For example, they're bureaucratic, they're large, a lot of people who've worked there a long time. So clicks form. It's hard to make change at all. So there's a variety of things on this list that those three industries share.
And I like that. I'm recalling you have a table in your book about the risk factors. And the more of those risk factors an organization has, the more that toxicity can grow and fester.
Yeah.
That's really good. And I've seen I've seen toxicity in nonprofit entities. So social nonprofit, charitable, etc. So can you explain what risk factors those would have? Because it always shocks me, right? Because that's about doing good in the world.
Yeah, I think some of those risk factors are competition for resources. So there's only so many fundraising dollars. So you have a variety of, every department in every industry is wanting dollars. But in a nonprofit where maybe the dollar has to go a lot farther, there's more jockeying for budget. I think you have a lot of passionate people who aren't necessarily there for the pay. They're there for their passion, and that passion can evolve into fighting for what the organization should be doing and how they should be spending their money or what they should be focusing on. And then I think a lot of nonprofits, I'm stereotyping here, but perhaps they grow without a whole lot of structure. And, you get bigger ones like United Way, they've got structure, but a lot of these kind of smaller local nonprofits, the founder founded it because they are passionate. And then you get people who join because they're passionate, but they might be missing the structure, which creates the ambiguity, and perhaps ambiguity for the future as well. So.
Really well. I love the way you explained that. Thank you, Catherine. When it comes to rebuilding, let's say rebuilding, because I know a lot of your work is rebuilding difficult or unhealthy cultures. When it comes to rebuilding to a positive culture, what would be the top priorities to begin with?
The top priority is to do a whole bunch of discovery. So that includes potentially a workforce survey. It potentially includes interviews or listening sessions or all of the above. So the organization needs to take time to understand what's driving the toxicity. And it's not the people, it's the organization. So we look at, for example, things like performance management. How much feedback do people get? Do they get to have growth conversations? Do they know their role in the greater good of the organization? Do they trust their manager? Do they trust their team? Do they feel like their team trusts them? So we look at internal communication. Do you got what you need to do your job well? Do you have the right training? So it's like we're kind of looking at all of these things that thwart a good culture through our survey. And then we can make very clear recommendations, which is one of my favorite things to do. It's like question 25 says that 50% of people feel this way. Well, here's a very clear step you can take to change that percentage for the next survey. And then building a lot of trust is important too. So when we work with clients, part of our survey or discovery process is helping rebuild trust in leaders, because if something's broken, everybody in the organization's feeling like the leaders didn't have our best interests or they made mistakes. And so we do a lot through our communication about the survey and or those listening sessions, to really help rebuild some of that trust that, hey, they recognize there's a problem, they brought us in, and we're not going to break your trust. We're going to give you really clear information about how to improve, and everybody's involved in the improvement. So step one is discovery. Part of that is building trust. Step two is to make a very clear action plan and publish that to the workforce to say, here's all the problems we found in that discovery, and here's all of the solutions. We suggest creating solutions with your entire workforce, as in people from various levels and departments, not just the leadership team going off on a retreat and like, we're going to solve it. And then from there, once you have your action plan, then you start implementing. And that means looking at organizational processes and adjusting them. The question I love to ask is, what is your organization doing or not doing that helps or hinders the right culture? And just using performance management as an easy example, if people don't get information about how to grow, They don't know the expectations. They're not getting coaching or attention from their manager. Those are all things that could be solved with a better performance management system. And so, if you don't have those types of things, they're facilitating toxic behavior. And certainly, training goes along with that action plan too. That people need to start learning how to behave. Managers need to learn how to, build and sustain a positive team environment. So, I mean, I could go on forever.
And then coaching, right?
And then coaching for the toxic leaders. Yeah. Well, and we coach leaders when we're going through culture change with clients, we're working with them for 2 or 3 years. And so the leaders are getting a lot of coaching just around culture and how to operationalize it, we call it. But then, yeah, if you have some toxic leaders, they need to be held accountable with some coaching.
And some of them are not going to change. They need to go, right? So I'm sure that many, many times that's come up, right? That despite the efforts, the self-insight is not there, the openness to change is not there, and the ego is just too massive.
Yep, that's true. And even people who aren't necessarily toxic, but who have thrived in the environment as it stood, sometimes some people start to kind of question, well, what does this mean for me and my social power and my ability to thrive here? And that's the whole point, though, and not to say it so rudely, but it's like, this is going to be the new culture. Here's the vision. Either get on the bus or not. And that's fine if you want to get off. Not that the leaders say it like that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. There's the door.
Say, the door's over there. Get out.
Yeah. But we're working remotely. Well, there's the X to turn off the screen.
There's the off button for your laptop.
Oh, God, we gotta laugh, right? Because this work is hard, right? I'm sure some days have been really hard in your world of doing what you do. But Catherine, what are you most proud of the changes you've helped organizations make?
We love, love, love data. So I'm always really proud when we've done a survey, worked with the organization for, 18 months or so, and then done another survey and see very clear changes in that quantitative data. That is wonderful. We've even had clients where 100% of their survey questions improved. We had one client where a bunch of their questions improved by 30%. So those are really great. The other piece of that is we have a big client right now. We didn't do a survey, we did listening sessions. And so we don't have kind of actual data to say it was this and now it's this. But talking to the leader, actually, I spoke to him last week for just kind of interview him to write a case study. And he was just like, when you guys come here, whatever you say is what we do. It's gospel. You all walk on water. And I'm not saying that, the win is that we're amazing. The win is that they're really listening to us. And they've said things to us like, we've been talking about this for 10 years and we didn't know what to do or how to do it. And you have solved this mystery for us and we are making changes. And just like that anecdotal evidence of everything being better. So that, I mean, our wins are just, we see that constantly. Rarely do we have a client where it's like, well, you didn't make any change, we're all very passionate about making sure people feel good at work, and to get that feedback pretty regularly from clients is what keeps us going.
And if they're not ready for any change, chances are they wouldn't hire you because they're just too, they're not ready or mature enough or ready enough to take action.
Yeah, well, sometimes we've had clients that we've had to fire, where they, here's an example. A client asked us originally to do a training on burnout and stress, managing that. And I said, well, what's causing burnout and stress? Maybe training them on it isn't the right answer. And, again, it's the organization that's causing the burnout and stress. So instead, we sort of audited all of their HR processes and had a whole long list of things they needed to do to address burnout and stress, not training. And they were just kind of like, okay, thanks. And didn't really take any of our advice. And then we did a little bit of training for them, but it's like, we don't want to be here if you're not interested in making real change, so that does happen sometimes.
It's almost the analogy of a surgery is needed, but they're putting a Band-Aid over it with a training workshop on burnout, right? Which I do a lot of those workshops too. But if there's a systemic underlying unhealthy culture, the Band-Aid isn't going to solve it.
Yeah, and back to that question, what's your organization doing or not doing that helps or hinders burnout and stress? And the answer was not, we need more training.
Exactly. So, Catherine, you seem like an avid learner. What do you read or listen to for your own growth and development lately?
I'm reading Let Them right now by Mel Robbins. In all honesty, I'm going through my own journey of boundaries and making sure I stay true to myself. And, given what I do, I think I have a pretty open, kind heart, and I wear my heart on my sleeve. And I'm realizing sometimes that really does not serve me. So I'm trying to get better about boundaries and, making sure that I set boundaries. And if people don't want to sort of live by those boundaries, then I need to figure out my next move, which might be to not interact with them anymore or reduce my interactions. So I'm reading Let Them right now.
Good. Yeah, that is a great concept. So I'm glad that's helping you because, yeah, you need to protect yourself and your energy reserves. I see the toxic workplaces pulling energy if you let it, and you need to replenish that because you're doing very important work.
Thank you. So are you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I feel like we have a lot in common. If you could have one wish for a better world when it comes to workplaces, what would it be?
That CEOs care as much about people as they care about the bottom line. I feel like I shouldn't have a job. I think I think, it's unfortunate kind of going back to HR. A lot of it is helping them make a business case. And that it bothers me that CEOs don't just say, that makes sense. We need to treat people well instead of, I know you're saying there's a problem, but we're still hitting our results and targets and KPIs. So leave it be.
Exactly. I just see it as a delicate balance of people and profit, people and performance. And I just see that if you don't have both in your attention, you're going to fail ultimately.
It's true. So yeah, that's what I wish that leaders cared more about the people that work for them.
Me too. And then we'll both be out of business.
Yep, that's the goal. Put myself out of business.
Well, it's just been a real pleasure chatting with you. I think your book is much needed, and I'll be recommending it to organizations for sure. And I'm glad that we're connected doing this work across North America.
Me too. And thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome, Catherine. Stay well. Thank you for tuning in to Where Work Meets Life. If you found this content valuable, please rate, review, and share with others who may benefit. If you're struggling in your work life and need support, I offer coaching sessions. You can book a complimentary consult on my website. I'm also a passionate keynote speaker and would love to discuss your professional speaking needs. Visit my website, drlaura.live, to sign up for my monthly e-newsletter filled with tips and resources to help you stay well.